Hello, my name is Nicholas Thurston and I work as Climate Change Officer for Canterbury City Council, helping to develop and deliver the climate action strategy and plans. In this video, we'll take a look at the key climate change issues and what they mean for Canterbury District here in Kent in the UK, which includes the city of Canterbury, the coastal towns of Whitstable and Herne Bay and the surrounding area. The information provides the context for the Council's draft climate change action plan, which is currently open for public consultation. We'll take a look at the questions. What are the climate change issues at a Canterbury District level? What changes can be made and how effective might they be? What are the main climate change issues for the Council in particular? And how can we review and comment on the draft climate change action plan? So let's get started. Here we are in East Kent, and this is an aerial view of our district. We are around 170,000 people living in an area of around 310 square kilometres. We live in 2 towns, 1 city and 24 villages. We have about 70,000 homes and 5,000 companies. Our 3 universities are home to around 30,000 students. We have a World Heritage Site and areas of outstanding natural beauty. We also have a beautiful coastline and our river system provides our water. Our district is predominantly rural and about a quarter of the land area is classified as sites of special scientific interest or a national wildlife area. As we're going to be looking at climate change, it's worth setting out the difference between weather and climate. Weather is what we experience daily. It varies over the seasons, from year to year, and it varies throughout the day. Climate is the average of what is happening. It's considered over a different period of time, but at least around 30 years, and trends are easier to spot, and different parts of the country and world have different climates. The timescales of changes to the climate is long compared to our lifetimes and memories. However, detailed study of comprehensive data shows us what is changing, and scientific investigation and modelling is what gives us projections for the future. The rapid increase of average global atmospheric temperature is called global warming. The relationship with global warming and the concentration of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is well documented. Take a look at the website called NASA Vital Signs for clear, impartial evidence and satellite images of the climate change effects. The evidence shows that the average global carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere stayed very constant for thousands of years, but it started to increase during the Industrial Revolution. During the second half of the 20th century up to now, the carbon dioxide concentration has increased very rapidly, matching the rate of increased use of fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas. The average global temperature has also increased, and this correlates to the carbon dioxide concentration. The rate of change of global temperature has been accelerating. It wasn't as obvious until the late 20th century. As the average temperature rises, the effects on the weather systems are becoming much more prominent. The global scientific community, coordinated by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, through the largest collective scientific body of work ever undertaken, say that action to reduce emissions is now at a critical point. The global impacts of climate change are already underway. Increasingly erratic weather patterns are causing extremes of rainfall and sunshine that are destabilizing human societies around the planet. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projects impacts of a severity which will really disrupt civilization if the global climate warms beyond 2 degrees, and the levels of uncertainty mean that targeting 1.5 degrees is a priority. You can read about the global impacts of a 2-degree rise compared to a 1.5 degrees in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's special report on 1.5 degrees warming, the summary for policymakers. The summaries are stark. Unprecedented numbers of people are affected, and the poorest and least developed countries are impacted the most. Closer to home, this infographic from the Met Office summarises the changes to UK weather over the last decade. There's been increased sunshine and high record temperatures. There's been less snow and storms. There's been increased heavy downpour. The Met Office conducts world-leading research and modelling into the future climate and has just released the most up-to-date models, calculating climate change impacts on weather patterns at a local level. The latest projections are down to 12 kilometre squares across the UK. And this shows a summary for our district using Whitstable as a reference point. It shows that our district will become gradually hotter and drier, with lower average rainfall, but more erratic heavy rainfall events. So what does this mean in terms of impacts? This is an example summary of the climate impacts and risks for Kent from Kent County Council's Climate Change Risk and Impact Assessment. You can read more about the risk and impact assessment online at the Kent County Council website, Kent's Changing Climate, and there's a summary for each sector. Working with Kent County Council, Canterbury City Council is developing the current climate change risk and impact assessment into a programme of implementation work with output for mid-2021. So we've explored the causes and impacts of climate change at a global level and had an overview of the local impacts. We're now going to explore what we can do locally to reduce the causes of climate change. This slide is based on the latest emissions data from national statistics. It shows the emissions from energy consumption at Canterbury District level. The emissions have reduced by about 30% since 2005, mostly because of big improvements in clean electricity generation, but also through improved efficiency from gas boilers. The total emissions from energy at the district level are around 600,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide. Emissions from transport have stayed static, only reducing by about 3% since 2005. Even though road vehicles have been getting more efficient, we've been buying more of them and driving more miles per year. So in 2018, nearly 40% of Canterbury District emissions come from fuel that powers road transport, and about 35% comes from gas used for heating and cooking in our homes and businesses. How much of this carbon dioxide can be absorbed by the natural environment? There's been a lot of discussion about planting trees. It's been in the media over the last couple of years in particular. This might be in part due to the very concerning situation of large-scale deforestation of the world's forests in South America, Africa, and Indonesia particularly. Protecting and increasing forests is of vital importance to climate change and biodiversity issues. However, working on forests alone is far from a feasible solution to the fossil fuel emissions problem, as this simple calculation shows. The exact rate of carbon sequestration, that means the storing of carbon into the soil, from natural systems is an area of detailed academic study and varies between land types and locations. Even the fastest growing species with the highest rates of carbon absorption cannot halt climate change on their own. And this imbalance between fossil fuel emissions and the capacity for natural systems to absorb carbon dioxide is also shown at a district level. The amount of emissions from 1 year of energy at Canterbury District level would take around 20 years to be absorbed by the district's natural environment. This is why there's now so much work, so much effort at a national and regional level to reduce the use of fossil fuels, as well as the important work to increase the green cover and biodiversity. Unfortunately, emissions from energy is not the whole picture. The products and services that our district consumes are also generating emissions from their manufacture and transportation. Some of these emissions are generated in the UK, but a lot is also generated overseas from all the imported goods that we use. This is often referred to as the carbon footprint. It's much more difficult to calculate than the emissions from energy, but if we pro-rata the UK's carbon footprint down to a district level, then it's about 1.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. And it's important to point out that the energy component of emissions sits within the domestic consumption. So as you can see, if you just look at the products and services that we purchase, then there's about 2/3 of the emissions come from those, and about 1/3 of those come from domestic, and the remainder coming from overseas. The Committee on Climate Change, the UK's agency that informs government policy decisions, has made it clear that some activities need to stop or be significantly reduced in order to meet climate change targets. The main ones are oil and gas extraction and production, reducing fossil fuels from air travel, removing fossil fuels, petrol and diesel from cars and vans and road transport, reducing emissions from heavy industry, reducing emissions from farming and particularly animal farming, and also reducing emissions from concrete and other construction activities, which are really heavy contributors to emissions at a global level. You can read more about the advice to the UK government and the assessments of current UK progress on the Committee on Climate Change's website. Based on the Committee on Climate Change's advice, the road to net zero, plus the government 10-point plan, these are the agreed national priorities for reducing emissions from energy. Investment in low carbon power generation, including battery storage, hydrogen infrastructure, and maybe packaged nuclear plants. Reducing the energy required to heat buildings and switching from gas central heating to heat pumps. And this top right-hand image shows a heat pump outside a home. Electrifying road transport for light vehicles, that's cars and vans, but also exploring the options for heavy transport, such as electricity, biofuels, or maybe hydrogen in there. Continued expansion of wind and solar generation using distributed smart networks and community energy schemes is also a major component of national strategy. There are other national research and development projects, including carbon capture and storage, offshore wind, and wave generation, but these are not so relevant to Canterbury District currently. What kind of changes will this bring at a household level? This illustration from the Energy Savings Trust shows the scale of change required to reach net zero energy emissions by 2050 at a UK household level. The graphic reflects the changes needed at a national and regional level, showing that big reductions in emissions from heating our homes, our personal transport, and our diets will bring around the large emissions reduction needed as we try to prevent the long-term destabilisation of the climate. On this graphic, the Energy Savings Trust are projecting that households will still be generating emissions from aviation in 2050, and that's a highly debated area. We should also note that this graphic does not include all the emissions from consumption, from making all the things that we buy that I talked about earlier. So now we're going to move on to look at the council and the council's responsibilities. Firstly, it's just helpful to think about the distribution of responsibilities between Kent County Council and Canterbury City Council. It's useful to look at this as we begin to think about what action the councils can take. This graphic shows the emissions from Canterbury City Council in 2019-20 in comparison to the emissions from district energy consumption and the total carbon footprint of the district. So Canterbury City Council contributed about 28,000 tonnes of carbon emissions in 2019-20, and that compares with 600,000 tonnes of energy emissions at a district level in 2018, and the pro rata carbon footprint of 1.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide, which is 2017 data. So it just gives you a comparison of the scale of the problem. Following international and national guidance, Canterbury City Council has evaluated the emissions from its operations and assets using the principles set out in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Some of the emissions are easier to evaluate than others. Fuels and electricity can be calculated accurately from meter readings and mileage records. Emissions from purchased products and services have to be estimated based on the amount of money spent and factors based on the emissions intensity of the type of product or service. There are some parts of the council's responsibility that the council controls directly or through commission services, things like the staff, offices and services it provides. The council also owns and manages lots of council houses and properties that are tenanted by others. As the summary shows, the council houses, over 5,000 homes out of around 70,000 total homes in the district, is the largest single group of emissions. The council has responsibility for maintaining and upgrading the council houses, and this includes how efficient they are and the heating systems that they use. This is also similar for lots of the commercial property and buildings like the leisure centres and some of the museums, where the council has to work in partnership with the tenants to look after the buildings and how they work. Before we look at these emissions in more detail, we'll take a look briefly at the established route to reducing emissions from any problem. This diagram shows the steps that are taken. Reducing the need for energy, making it so that a building is warm naturally, for example, or by removing the need to travel. Using energy more efficiently, by using more efficient equipment, or by reducing energy losses from a building. Switching to renewable energy sources like solar and wind is the third step to bring it down to zero emissions at an overall level. It's worth noting that step 2, using energy more efficiently is only really an interim step if the source of energy is from burning fossil fuels. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that we need to remove burning fossil fuels that emit carbon dioxide from the mix, and we need to do this as quickly as possible. So going back to the Council's emissions across the scope of it and the breadth of its activities, this breakdown shows the emissions in more detail, and the orange lines highlights the emissions that add up to about 80% of the overall picture. As you can see, the largest single bar is bar 10 for the housing. As I said before, there's around 5,000 council homes, and these are mostly powered by gas central heating. And so the green represents the gas used to heat those buildings. The blue represents the electricity, and the red represents anything that the council has to buy in terms of maintaining or equipment or services that it procures from other people. Heating commercial buildings, that's line 15, is also a major contributor to the footprint. And you can see the gas components in green and the electricity component in blue. Heating the swimming pools in the 3 leisure centres, that's Canterbury, Whitstable and Herne Bay leisure centres, and the air above the swimming pools takes year-round energy input to heat those, and they're currently powered by gas boilers. So, and that's also shown there in line 13. Heavy vehicles, there are around 30 refuse collection trucks, the street cleansing equipment and the park and ride buses. They're the largest source of council vehicle emissions, and they're in lines 6, 7 and 8. Building and maintaining flood defences, which is shown in line 12, called engineering, is a major endeavour and a large contributor to the overall emissions. Maintaining flood defences requires lots of concrete and rocks, which take energy to make and to move around. Construction and maintenance of buildings is the main source of Scope 3 emissions across all of the services, except for item 01, the core organisation, because that also includes all of the things like office equipment and clothing and the IT services used to support the council's operations. So this shows the emissions from the council activities broken down across the scope of, and range of what it does. So the council has prepared the draft climate change action plan from 2021 to 2030, and that comprises actions for the council to take to reduce emissions and also to build resilience into the way it delivers its services. And it also includes actions to encourage the whole district to get well on the path of emissions reductions in line with national goals. And it also includes actions to increase the resilience of the whole district. So you can find out more and all the detailed actions within the action plan at the link shown on the screen there. Please do log in and read it and provide your feedback through the mechanism through that link. Okay, thank you very much for listening.